Hi, this is Paul, and I have a guy that some of you love to hate. I've learned that. I don't know if it's because he's got three consonants in a row in his last name. BVR. I've been just pondering that this morning. Lefay. That some of those consonants are. I think if you moved them around a little bit more, your name would be friendlier to Americans. I don't know if your ancestors thought of that, but so
Blame the
Mark
French.
Lefevre,
Yeah. Yeah, blame the French. They did it.
they
I
did it. And I'm trying to read things sometimes, and then there are these French words, and it's like, what did the French do? I mean, Spanish, I can handle. English, not a problem. The French? What's with the French?
I don't know. That's why we left, man. We were like, what's going on in this country? It's nice weather, but the language, forget about it. We're out of We're going to go in the woods and hunt beavers. In Canada, the coldest place on the planet. Sure, why not? It must have been really bad in France because the weather's great. So the rest of it must have just sucked.
That's right. They all they picked. Well, I last week they had the 7 Years War on the Rest is History podcast, and today I haven't gotten through yet, but I was just listening to the French Revolution. So those French, they just, oh, John Calvin was a Frenchman, and a lot of Dutch don't like to think about that. Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, he was a Frenchman. He was a French refugee who went down to Geneva, and much to the annoyance of a lot of the people who were in Geneva before, was just part of, they should have built a bigger wall to keep all the French and the French refugees out, because it wasn't the King of France wasn't really having the Protestant Reformation. And so John Calvin left and he wrote a book, and the book was sort of like the purpose driven life for this, for the 16th century. And hence Calvinism became a thing. So, but we what are we going to talk about today, Mark? Because you had some, I mean, you've been you've been colonizing me with your long meaty comments on my YouTube videos. And you've been, I mean, you've had an active role in the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord community. So I've got all these different aspects of people who listen to my videos, and you're one of these guys who doesn't go to church. You don't identify as a Christian. You were running the meditation channel over there, over at Bridges of Meaning, and then you want to really take apart some of John Vervaeke's work, because you've got some perspectival is just not high resolution enough. Is
Mm.
that a fair summary?
Yeah, I like that. Some better summary than I could have done, Paul. Well
That's
done.
that's what I do.
Yeah,
I
no, I think
summarize.
the comment, I think, to your point that I think caught your eye the most was about church,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
you like to talk to people, with people who don't know anything. And
Right.
so if you want to talk to somebody who really doesn't know much about church, I am your guy, right? Which is my way of saying I have no idea what I'm talking about to a very large degree, right? Experientially, I have very little experience with church, although I was in church yesterday, and I get to blame you for all the weird things that happened. Well, so what happened was my aunt and my uncle came down here, and my best friend was also supposed to come down here, Brian, but he didn't. He ended up
They're
not
coming
making it.
down from New England, where
Yeah,
of
they
course people still live for some reason. We don't
I
know
think,
why.
well, they're coming to that conclusion too. I mean, they got a big spread up there in the middle of nowhere, New Hampshire, and everything, and they're like, well, I don't know what we're doing up here, right? To some extent. So they've got their little camper, and they bring their camper down, and they park it right in front, because I've got this big 12-acre property that I don't know how to manage. And I thought, because they were only going to be here for the weekend, that maybe we just sit and relax. And no, 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 not with a Lefevre aunt. That's not going to happen. Lefevres just work, Paul. They just work and they work. So my crazy Catholic aunt, the only one still going to church all the time, right? We always say grace before dinner. And I learned for a while they actually went to a Presbyterian church. I was like, what? You went to a Presbyterian church? And then they got back into the Catholic church. Oh, I know. And I didn't know this. I found out yesterday or the day before, right? So they come by, and we're we're working away on the yard, and she's like weeding my garden, and my uncle and I are out on the dam because I have a big pond, right? I've got about an acre of water. So we're out on the dam just cutting down trees and getting the verge back, and like, all day. And it's South Carolina, and it's some days are too hot to work and some days are okay to work, but
Yeah.
no days are great to work because it's too late in the season now.
Yeah.
And my roses are popping out, and now we can get to them. They smell beautiful, by the way. So yeah, and then I got to talk to her more about church. Of course, when they come down, A, we say grace at dinner, right? B, my aunt cooks, so I don't have to. This is great. Like, this is like fantastic, right? And then we go to church on Sunday, and they're Catholics, so we go to St. John Newman down the street, and it's in Columbia. It's not too far from the house. And then we go to Waffle House, and another church-like experience, right?
That's
Go to
right. That's
church.
right. But not a New England church experience.
Right. No, not a New England. Right. That's why you have to do it while you're down here, because
That's right.
man, you get a Waffle House, you go to Waffle House. You don't miss that. It's a church-like experience, Paul. It is. So yeah, which is my way of saying, look, I have very little experience with church. Most of it's Catholic, right? Not exclusively, but most of it's Catholic. But when you mentioned the possibility of talking to me about this, of course, me being me, Lefevre's damn bastard. I've got notes, Paul. I've got notes. I was working on them 20 minutes ago, organizing them, right? So I am ready to talk to you about church and all the things I might see wrong with church. And my aunt gave me some tips about Catholicism in particular and their problems. And so I'm ready to go that way if that's the way you want to go.
Okay, so we're coming at this from sort of the Vervaeke corner of the conversation, which is a religion that's not a religion. We're attempting to create an ecology of practices to afford self-transcendence. And, John has all of this whole spiel he goes into, which, of course, any religious person just listens and is like, huh? What's he talking about? But what fascinates me is that on one hand, so the video I just posted today, I often use YouTube like Twitter. And what I mean by that is the whole game is about titles. And the title, the title of my video today is, "Are Christians too bound by their dogmatism to be satisfying conversational partners?" And I said that because, that was sort of this guy's take on Christians. But then he listened to me a little bit. I thought, well, he's a little more interesting. I'll talk to this guy. And also, I'm one of the weird YouTube channels that has, I'm up over 1,000, but I'll let randos come on and, sell their pillows or whatever the heck they want to sell themselves. It doesn't matter. I'll do that, which, some people think my wife thinks I'm absolutely nuts for that. She's like, "You're letting people like self-promote on your channel?" Like, yeah, why not? I said, "No, you shouldn't let them do that." No, it's not a big deal.
Well, what is church if not self-promotion?
Well, this is exactly the point, because so you got John Vervaeke, a religion that's not a religion, and he's got all of these fancy words, which is, in church world, you're talking super in-house, insular, academia, so John's got all this language, and as a pastor, I listen to that and it's like, that'll never sell, because I can't talk my fancy theology stuff, and the eyes of the congregation glaze over. Actually, Peterson, in his question and answer, had a little segment on that about his experience of doing counseling with different personality types and the kinds of languages that they would tend to focus on. I might pull that out and do a little commentary on that. But you've been one of the people that I've noticed that you've been quite aware of this, because you have, you can listen to, you can swim in the Vervaeke pond of self-transcendence and meaning crisis and all that language, very comfortable, you and Manuel, and we'll have to have Manuel on the channel again soon sometime. Good old Iron Root from his dark days at the Bridges of Meaning, living under the bridge. But you also, you went into the Billy Graham library. It's not really a library at all. You went to the Billy Graham shrine, because that's exactly what it is. It's a shrine, but Protestants don't have shrines. They don't like shrines, but functionally it's a shrine. And see, this is where the Vervaeke stuff really starts to shine, because what Vervaeke does is take sort of this clinical language and takes things out of their theological traditional silo and kind of puts it up into this other translation language. But you're also aware that if that is actually going to communicate with people, it's going to have to come back down. And it's going to have to come back down in, as John says, an ecology of practices that afford self-transcendence and all of these things. And that's something that I've obviously been stressing to John over the time, that it's got to scale. It's got to scale in terms of IQ. It's got to scale in terms of, to use Petersonian things, the big five personality profiles. And that's one of the huge advantages that traditional religions have, is that without knowing big five or any of that stuff, they've been doing it over centuries and actually have an ecology of practices, and they just don't know they have these things because that's language from another universe. So I've talked enough, because that, and what I've noticed from your comments and your work is that you've been quite attentive to this. And you're also, when you went to the Billy Graham shrine, Protestants just you have this little hitch when I say the Billy Graham shrine. Oh, you're being dismissive. I'm not being dismissive. That's what it is. Yeah. So anyway, we're both talkers, and so this could be a very interesting attempt for both of us to find a talking space. But so I don't know. That's my take on you. Maybe you have a different take on you.
No, I like the way you phrased it, right? I do translation. So like in my professional career before, there's this thing called DevOps. It's between the developers, the software developers, and the operations crew, right? And so that's a relatively new term. I'm like, yeah, do you think software companies weren't doing that all along? Is that you thought that software companies they're magic, right? They did, come on. So, I used to be called, you're going to love this. I came up with this term, obviously, right? They're like, well, we need a title for you. And this is one of the Fortune 500 companies I used to work for. And I said, yeah, IT, because everybody had an IT department back in the day, liaison, because it's French. So now it's got credence.
Now it's cool. Now it's relational.
The irony of the guy who doesn't like France at all and insists that's why we left for Canada, because France sucks, using that as a trick psychologically to fool people into thinking I was important in my job. But I was highly successful because I'm a software developer. I know how to write software. I can write software like that, right? And I'm also a systems engineer, so I know how to set up the infrastructure, right? And then it's interesting, and I'll just tie this back because there's enough technical people that listen to you, right? So that you talk about scalability. There's two types of scalability. You can scale up and you can scale out, right? And the cloud revolution is scaling out instead of up. Not that you can't do both, but like the difference is we used to buy big servers with bigger CPUs and more memory. And then it was like, nah, write your application so that it runs across many little servers. So, right, it's that scalability aspect. And then the problem when we're talking about church and some of the stuff that John's talking about, and, just a disclaimer for those who don't know, Mark is not a fan of Ritnar. He's not, the Ritnar project is not something he thinks is going to be
You're going to have to spell that out. The Ritnar project?
Yeah, that's the religion
that's not a religion.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Tech people, you love those little acronyms that a lot of other people out is like the Ritnar project. Who's Ritnar? Is that David Ritnar or Andrew Ritnar? What Ritnar was that?
Fair enough.
Religion that's not a religion. You're not a fan of the religion that's not a religion. Well, let's start there.
I'm in the Peugeot camp. And John's okay with the Peugeot camp. He said this a couple of times, at least 3, right? He says, look, if Jonathan Peugeot is right and all we need to do is get people nearest the religion that they most cohere with, bang, problem solved. So it's not like John doesn't think that Ritnar does what the church does. Obviously, he must see the parallels there, right? And then the interesting thing, the other thing that you mentioned that I wanted to go into, so I'm glad you kind of opened a space for that, was I listened to Bishop Barron and Peterson. I haven't listened to your commentary yet just because I've had company. I haven't even been on the Discord in like 2 days.
You've been to church.
So yeah,
church takes time.
It does. It's ridiculous. Those Catholics, man, up and down. Anyway, so, so when you hear Bishop Barron talk, he's using a form of enchantment. He's like, I'm going to use jargon to draw you in. And I was like, you sneaky little, and then I have my words for Catholics. So anyway, well, they traumatized my entire family, except my crazy aunt. She's still in. So good for her.
She sounds quite anti-fragile. I mean, she sounds like if everything goes down, she's the woman to have with you, because she works, she endures, she can do Presbyterian, she can do Roman Catholic. So good on her.
Yeah, they've got a garden, they've got solar panels up there. Like, they're ready for the apocalypse, or at least as ready as you can be. Actually, it's very funny. But she just keep going. Yeah, her husband and I are like, we're tired, and she's still working, weeding the garden, and we're just like, yeah, we're just gonna rest. We've been mowing lawns and moving we're done, right? So yeah, very anti-fragile, right? And very, very. But most of the people in my family are like that. We run 100 miles an hour at everything, right? Or through everything, more like. So sometimes good, sometimes bad. So, but you see these patterns played out, right? With, well, now we're gonna, the Catholic Church is gonna be like, well, we know what's wrong. We're gonna use jargon to draw people in, and we're gonna use the equivalent theological language to make people think that we're being technical. And I'm like, really? That's your trick? That's gonna work? So I'm like, oh, this Bishop Barron guy, I don't know if that trick's going to work. I mean, I see what he's doing, and I'm not a fan of enchantment in general, but maybe it'll work. So
you're in the Peugeot camp, but you're not a fan of it. See, because when you said that, because the Peugeot camp has, so if you identify as being in the Peugeot camp, but you're not religious and you're not into enchantment, you're going to have to probably translate why you're in the Peugeot camp, because I have bumped into others like you who are in the Peugeot camp, but they're not religious. Some of them are even anti-religious, but they're in the Peugeot camp. And for, I think, the majority of the people in the Peugeot camp, that's going to be confusing and or annoying or offensive. So you're going to have to explain that.
Yeah. So my version of enchantment, which is usually the problem, I have very good definitions, or at least very solid definitions. I shouldn't say good. I have solid definitions of the words that I use. I'm very precise, or tend to be when I can be. So my version of enchantment is when you're using language only to sway somebody in a certain direction. So one form of enchantment is people tend to drop their voice and they get quiet and they tell you how the stars are linked to the cells in your body, and it's like, no, just stop. Like, if you can't make your point with passion, then maybe you don't believe what you're saying, right? And maybe not. It's, I'm not saying that's an absolute rule, but other forms of enchantment, using jargon, right? So like, that's Eric Weinstein, right? He enchants people by using jargon that they don't understand, and that's great until you meet somebody who does understand it, and they go, gotcha, you're wrong. Right? Not that I would do that, Paul. I'm just saying, theoretical person.
I wouldn't do it either. I'd never say Eric Weinstein was wrong.
Yeah, I'm also not a fan.
I can't find any videos on my channel that says anything like that about any of the Weinsteins. They're not there. They're not there.
I think from now on, I'm calling Brett the smarter brother to Eric, because I think that's true. Smarter in a practical sense.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But still a little obtuse in terms of the things that he says that are like,
yeah. Anyway. Well, he's got contradiction problems for sure. But I mean, this goes back to this whole idea of, well, what's the church up to and what's it doing? And then, because it's a good question to ask, like, well, when we're talking about church and, we're saying religious versus irreligious. Now, I grew up in New England. So in New England, you didn't ask about people's religion. But I'll tell you, Paul, I don't know how many Bibles I have, but I have many, because when somebody gives me a sacred book to them, whether it be a Bible or a Bhagavad Gita, I keep it. Whether I read it or not is irrelevant, because it was important enough to them to give to me, right? Like, I don't need to know anything else. Like, I don't need to understand or buy into your religion. I just need to know that this is a sacred object to you and that you cared enough to share it with me. And the same with a church invitation. Would you come and worship with me? Right? It's like, well, yes, that's an honor that you think me worthy enough to participate. Like, period. Like, I don't, And part of that's my New England upbringing, I'm sure of it. And part of it's just, because in New England, right, you bump into these groups that aren't on the same page. But it goes back to this idea, well, what the hell is church? And I think that church is, well, among other things, is where you outsource your ethics, right? So if you want to talk about distributed cognition, one of the things that John does, he won't mind me saying this because I emailed him already and kind of complained, like he talks about distributed cognition and people go, ooh, distributed cognition, good. And I'm like, no, distributed cognition is how people take over your mind. It can be good, but it's not necessarily good. And one form of distributed cognition is outsourcing. So what do we outsource? Well, we outsource all kinds of things. Like we outsource our sense of ourselves, right? That's that we're looking out from our eyes, right? We can't see ourselves. And so what do? We look how others look at us, right? I believe it was you that said that, if I remember correctly, right? And so we're outsourcing our ability to understand ourselves by looking at others. And maybe when we do that too much, and that's something like not having enough prayer, meditation, whatever, right? Maybe when we do that too much, we become a slave to that vision, and then we can hook onto identity politics or whatever more easily because we only have one source, and that is the people in our immediate bubble, right? I don't have that problem for sure because I'm disagreeable and I've always had meditation and other ways of sense making in the world, which I'm hoping to share with people, by the way, eventually. I'm going to be doing a YouTube channel. I'm going to talk about sense making. That's going to be one of my threads. I'm going to do a thread on how I'm making sense of the world now and what tools I use, to understand. But the church is where you do some of that outsourcing of ethics, your ethical and moral views, and I use the definition of ethics as the big box. It's the landscape, ever changing, and morals is the implementation. That's the definition that I use. If you want more on that, there's a talk on the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord channel with Manuel and I and this guy Jules, who outlines the religion that is not a religion, the Written Art Project, in some excellent slides. I thought he did an excellent job with John's work. And I talk about that there. Manuel chimes in with his always brilliant work. And it's a beautiful video. It's 2 hours. It's well worth your time, I assure you. But, and it deals with these issues of ethics and how we're outsourcing. And, when you outsource it to the law, for example, you end up with legalism, right? So I think that's an important part of the church. The other one is, the church provides you a common aim in community, right? And so you're outsourcing your ethics, but aside from that or parallel to that, there's this aim in community that you have in this fellowship, right? And, again, so what we talk about on the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord server is, we're on a wisdom journey together. We're not on the same journey. We're not on the same path, but we're all going to the same place, and we're going to hope we converge to some extent. And occasionally we'll bump into or off of each other, right? And that's the sangha and the community there. That's what it's called when you get people together. And we think that's important. Like, don't just meditate alone. Meditate with a group. And you can meditate alone and meditate with a group, but don't just meditate, by yourself, because that's providing you a common aim in community. So you can tie that together with Vervaeke's work rather nicely. And then I think the other one, the last one that I have in my notes is the right relationship, right? Church is supposed to provide you with right relationship. So right relationship to the ineffable or God, right? Right relationship to other people, right? How you're supposed to handle these relationships. And right relationship to nature. So we're out there, we're clearing the dam. I have this huge dam. It's enormous, right? Because it circles half the pond, and the pond's about an acre. So, you can imagine it's right out my window. It's beautiful. All these trees growing on the wrong side of the dam towards the pond, they got to go. And they're, it gets crowded in, and I won't leave my house if I don't have to. I can see the pond. I don't need to be out there, right? So stupid me.
Got air conditioning inside.
Right. But then my aunt and uncle come and they're like, what are we going to work on? And I'm like, really? Okay. I guess the thing that I want to do the most is clear that, right? Like that's the number one thing. So my uncle and I go and do that. And of course my aunt's like, oh, I'm worried about the front of the house. It's got to look nice. I'm like, no, I don't want the front of the house to look nice. When the barbarians come, they'll skip over me. They'll think I'm poor and destitute. Leave the old door there. It's fine. It's like, no, don't show them. I don't want anybody to see the brand new BMW. They're going to be like, oh, let's get him. That's no good. So So we're going through and we're cutting vines and we're trimming trees and, we're building this beautiful trail now. It's really gorgeous. I'm really impressed with how it looks. And then we go to church yesterday, right? And we go to church, Paul. What are they preaching about, Paul? What are they preaching about, Pastor Paul?
Well, it's
The vines.
that's
The
right,
vines.
because they're
And
using the
pruning.
lectionary because
That's
they're
what
Roman
they're telling
Catholic.
us.
Yes.
Okay. Well, no, but see, I know you knew that because I know you did that.
Yeah.
Somehow, some way, you're responsible for this. That can't be a coincidence, Paul. You can't tell me that. This is you orchestrated this somehow. I'm blaming you.
That's right. Me. It was interesting to me, though, that what you paid attention to was the sermon, because that's because sort of what happened with Catholicism is that Protestants said, we're about preaching. And so some Catholics were like, we can preach too. And other Catholics were like, we're about the ritual. And so it's interesting to me that it was the sermon that came up. And I'm in the lectionary right now, but I'll diverge from the lectionary after Pentecost. So, so I want to hear more about this, though. So how long was it? And what did you think of it?
It was about an hour.
And no, not the church service. How long was the sermon on the vine?
I don't know. He mentioned it several times, and the vines.
How long was his talk?
And the trees, probably 15 minutes.
Yeah, see, that's a Roman Catholic sermon. That's about 15 minutes. It's just a little homily. Yeah. You go to one of these big non-denominational churches down there. Like Elevation Church or something like that, and you'll get a 45-minute sermon.
Right.
So what else do you remember about the sermon?
Well, they were using mixed metaphors poorly, and I was not happy about that. Right, because they're going on about trees and vines, and I'm like, no, you take all the vines away from all the trees, because in nature, that's what you do. And then, my brain's going, when we get home, we have to write down this whole thing about relationship between church and nature, right? Because they're not. And then interestingly, of course, and this has to be your fault because Jonathan Peugeot, he talked about this, right? He was having a YouTube talk with somebody else, and on his Clips channel appears him basically justifying Christianity as the savior of nature. And he made a very good argument.
I didn't watch that clip. Share it with me. Share me the idea.
So the idea was basically he was saying that we're supposed to be in paying attention to and in right relationship with nature.
Right.
And if we wouldn't be destroying the environment at the rate we're destroying it at. So it wasn't a foreclosure argument.
Right.
I like that.
Right.
Right. And so he said, because we're so focused on the materiality and getting more stuff and quicker and cheaper,
right.
That that's thrown off the balance between nature and the higher power, basically. Right. And I was like, wow, that's pretty good.
That's a common Christian argument from certain camps, but Christianity is really broad. So
that was another problem. This is another problem I want to talk to you about, you church people. Okay. So you're a proxy for all the problems of the church.
I'll speak for all Christians everywhere.
Well, this really is the issue, right? Like, Christians seem to be less focused on what they have in common and more focused on what their particular sect or version or whatever is after.
When we feel like we're in the majority, that's what we do. But that's just classically human. Every group does that. When they feel they're in the majority, then they divide between themselves. When they feel threatened as a group, then they huddle up and.
Right. Well, and I think they do, very much feel threatened, and fair enough. Like, they should. They are under attack, right? And then this goes into, we'll say, the church and power, which is the section that I have next in my notes. Nice segue, Paul. See, you must be reading my notes because you're segueing right into everything.
No, Mark, I'm reading your mind.
You possibly. I'll believe anything at this point. After that Billy Graham trip, Paul, I'll believe anything. I'm like not ruling anything. If you told me I met with the lizard people and the ancient aliens, I'd just be like, okay, I'll believe it. I'm in. I don't know what's going on. I'm in. So, yeah, I mean, I think that the church is, I sort of view, you talk about powers and principalities. I don't like any of that phrasing. I mean, I like principalities, but I just view the world as three principalities: the principality of government, the principality of economics, and the principality of religion. And that's all I have. And then those three, thank you. I like it. Those three fight with each other, right? And then I have made the argument before on the Discord server, on our Discord server, not your Discord server. But I would make it on your Discord server. I like your Christian. They need to up their argumentation game a little bit. But
well, the problem is that they've sort of taken over the Discord server, and so they just, it's that same thing. They start, the Orthodox and the Catholics and the Protestants, they do all of that talk instead of facing outward and saying, hey, wait a minute, there's way more out there than there is in here. So that's where your attention should be. But
they're the unpruned vines that they were talking about in the Catholic. Yeah, damn Catholics. They were on it again. So, I think that what happened was, in the old days, the king just determined the religion. There was no real difference between king and religion, right? Ancient Egypt is a good example. The Etruscans are a good, right? They're all excellent examples. The king and the religion were tied up in one another, the state power. So that there was no government principality. It was all one principality. And because the king owned the economic principality, then the king's gold was worth more than your gold. Literally, right? Like, you just couldn't spend your stuff sometimes. Or when you did, you had to spend it with the king. That went up into the feudal era, as near as I can tell from the history reading I've done.
All the way to the company scripts with the coal mine and the sharecroppers. Same thing.
Yeah, well, that's a return too, right?
Yeah.
It actually split. It actually seems to have split when Jesus said, render unto Caesar. Because when he did that, he split two principalities apart and left an opening for the third.
Yep.
And when I realized that, I was like, wow. And then I went back in my head and redid all my history, and I went, yeah, it seems to fit, right? And then you see this, people trying to put it back together, right? They're like after the French Revolution, it's like, what we really need is a king. It's like, wait, you went through all that trouble and now you want a king back? Like, really? That's your answer? But that's what happened. Like, maybe that is right. And then you see some of the things today, I would argue, is an attempt to return to feudalism. That's all their idea of socialism and what historical feudalism looked like. Not much different.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Think about it, Paul. You'll get as scared as I did when I thought about it. Yeah. But I think that the church isn't standing up for itself against the economic principality and the government principality. I think it's really sort of, and part of that is it's not being responsible for its own failings because it doesn't have ideals. And I took very seriously, your statements about losing the monasteries. And one of the things I think that happened is because we don't have the monasteries, we lose a couple of aspects. One is, it's great to point to an ideal. And you can bring this back to Plato's forms, or eidos. I hate forms. Eidos is a much better word that John brings in. I really like that term, because then it doesn't have the forms or things you can grab. No, eidos, better, right? So it's the same as the eidos. You've got the Jesus eidos, if you will, right? But I know I'm going to get burned at the stake or whatever. It's okay. I'm ready. Right. But then you've got the monasteries, which are as close to that, or living as close to that ideal as possible, but they're real. Like, you can just go visit them. Right. And so it's like, oh, but then also the church has its modern equivalent ideal to look towards. And so when it transgresses, it can look towards the monasteries and say, that's right. Reminding itself, this is as close to that we can get on earth to embodying the archetypal Jesus or something, right? If you want to go Jungian on it, which, as you noted earlier, I do. I'll drag in all the vocabulary. I don't care. We'll use it all. So yeah, I think all of that is important from the church perspective, and then they can't take responsibility anymore. And one of the results of that is that they're not able to point to God in a way that's accessible, because they're not embodying it anymore. And one interesting model that I've been playing with is, you've got the church up here, and then you've got the ideal monasteries over here, and then you've got the secular version, which is something like all of the things the church does that isn't I guess it's liturgy or something. I don't know all these crazy theological terms, right? The stuff that's not about the church per se. So like the Catholic schools, like those are, right, because they're the secular version of the churchy things, roughly speaking. So you've got the ultra pure and the mostly dirty impure, and then the church in the middle, right? I think that's a better model. But when they adopted the secular stuff, they took it way too seriously, right? They're using this scientific framing. And so because they're using scientific framing, they're not teaching through mimicry. And teaching through mimicry is a different thing. And then the case that I'll make there is one of the ways you teach through mimicry is you use a tool that is non-lingual. And one way to do that is to, I don't know, say the mass in Latin that nobody understands anyway. Why? Because you're not relating to the words anymore. You have to rely on the mimicry. And this gets you into a different training mode, right, in your brain. And I think this is one place where, you know, and maybe John's on to this. To be fair to John, I don't know what John's thinking is on this, but it didn't come out as well in the meditation. It's something I talk about a lot. I go, look, there's all these traditions. There's feudal traditions, and there's a hell of a lot of traditions in the East where you're a journeyman, you get sent off to a master, and you get there, and there's no talking. Well, what the hell is that about? That totally destroys our idea of education completely. It's like, well, what is our education system? What the hell are we doing? That's why when people start talking about, well, you know, I have a meditation teacher. I'm like, oh, I wince. I'm like, no, I don't think they're teaching. Like, I want to reserve teaching for the reprehensible Western idea of education. And I'd like to reserve some other term, right? Like a guide or a master or something for the mimicry end, because I think that's more important. But this gets back to participatory knowledge. So if you're familiar with John's model, there's participatory knowledge there. And so that's what that is. How do you convey participatory knowledge? Well, you can't convey it towards speaking, would be my argument. And maybe my argument's wrong because, you know, I'm wrong all the time. I also have a lot of ideas. So statistics. I'll claim statistics instead of ignorance. So, but I think that's it. Like, how do you train that whole side of your brain that's non-lingual? Well, you train it through mimicry. And one way to enforce mimicry is to use a different language or no language, right? And then you're forced to pay attention because you're not busy talking and listening because your ears are so disruptive to you. And I only know this because I went into anaphylactic shock one day and almost died. Your ears are so disruptive to you that you can hear things blocks away, like birds, all the time. And you just filter it all out. Man, when you die, by the way, or come as close as you possibly can without actually, because I thought I was going to die. I was like, oh, I guess I'm going to die alone in a train station, mostly abandoned train station in the Boston subway system underneath Boston Common. That sucks. But, you know, and what am I going to do?
You were near Park Street Church.
Yeah, not too far. So you know, your hearing goes crazy, and you know, I'm in a subway station. I'm below ground. I hear birds. I'm like, wow, and I hear people walking and talking and everything, and there's no people anywhere in the station. It's an abandoned. It's mostly used for commuters. Boylston Street Station is mostly used for commuters, people, because Park Street's right up the thing. It's the next stop over, and it's like four. You could walk between them. People do it you can probably walk faster than the subway gets there, in fact, because the subway doesn't move all that fast because it's got to stop again. So, you know, hearing, most of what we're doing is filtering out. But then if you don't have that stimulus, what are you paying attention to? Well, you've got to be paying attention to motion and the things people are doing and all the body language that's going on and all the crazy hand motions that the stupid French people do. Although it's mostly Italians, so the French aren't taking blame for that. So I think that's important, right? But and maybe that's what points the way, you know, to God for the church is through participation and not, you know, trying to explain it to people through language. You get these stupid mixed metaphors about vines and trees and pruning that don't actually make any, like, I was like, no, this doesn't even work. Even I can't make this work in my head. Come on. I can usually understand these crazy, you know, I'm Peugeot talks and I can barely understand half the stuff he says because but I know he's right. Like, I know, oh no, he's definitely right. I'm just stupid. Fair enough. Right. Like I'm metaphorically illiterate, probably, right? But this did not make any sense. I just couldn't get my head around any of it. And And I think that's, but I think that's important. If they're focused too much on the language, that, that's not good. And I think that, the other way they adopt scientific framing is they're treating, and this is Jacob, right, on Bridges of Meaning. He talks about this occasionally. The first time I heard it, I just thought it was so beautiful and brilliant. Treating God like a vending machine. I was like, yes, you don't put in a quarter and hit B6 and get a Snickers bar, as much as we want, right? Like, you can't just pray to God and then he does what you ask, right? That doesn't work that way. But we treat everything that way. That's a scientific way of thinking, right? We're going to get down to a point where we have certainty about an outcome based on an action. That's what science does. It's like, well, fair enough. That's great. That's a wonderful tool. I love it. But it doesn't work for everything in the world. And I would argue it can't, and I'll make the argument, cannot work for most, and I will also stand by that statement, things in the world. A bold statement, but I think I can back it up, although it takes hours. So I won't try here, but I think that's literally true. That is the problem, is that we think that science has a handle on things. Science can't tell you how bumblebees fly. I keep hearing this argument. I'm like, well, show me the paper, buddy, because I've been looking for years and I haven't seen it. Now, it could exist because there's lots of scientific papers and I don't look at most of them, but like, don't say it's there unless you produce it. Like, I want to see the goods. I'm a pragmatist. Show me the goods. There's all kinds of things like that. We think we know how they work, but mostly what we know is that they work, not how they work. Like, we know that certain types of airfoils work for flying, but there's a bunch of them that we don't know how they work at all. The ground effect is like, what the hell is this? You mean there's a way of flying that doesn't scale vertically? Yeah, there's an actual mode of flight that doesn't scale vertically. You can go like 30, 35 feet or something. I forget what it is. And after that, the effect vanishes and you fall to the ground.
That's interesting.
Right. Whereas planes, they don't fly well at 35 feet. You're going to be going really fast. And then they lift off the ground. And like, if you're 100 feet up, the planes are fine. Weird, right? This is all about scaling. And Nassim Taleb talks about scale invariant, and all the scale invariant things might be in one side and all the scientific scale variant things might be on the other. Who knows? I'm not making that claim, but it's interesting to think about. And the church is not, they've adopted this scientific method. They've adopted this science framework, right? Which was, to be fair, born out of them. You make this point all the time, right? Science is born out of the church, guys. Hate to tell you. And there's a battle there, but I think it's a one-way battle. And I think that's the problem, is the church isn't taking responsibility for saying, science, we bore you, my child. Why are you fighting us? Stop fighting us. We're not fighting. No one in the church is going, abolish science. We're going to murder the scientists. It's like the greatest scientists of our time had the same percentage of belief in God as the general population. Like, Einstein believed in a higher power. Like, oh, well, he wasn't strictly speaking. And everybody's using these terms, deists and all this. Listen, either you believe that there's a force out there beyond the scientific reckoning, and I don't really care what word you use. We like to use ineffable on our server, or you don't. And that's really where the line is. Stop saying, well, the founders of the country were deists. They weren't really God believers. Oh my goodness. You said the same thing twice. Come on, it's crazy. But I think the church lets people get away with it. I think the church should be holding people's feet to the fire on that, preferably literally, because I'm a pragmatist and I like to see things burn. But so what do you think of all that, Pastor Paul? I've spoken.
Yeah, there was a lot there.
Your turn.
There was a lot there. I like. See, when I listen to you talk about this, what I see you doing, what I do is I put it sort of through a filter of church history. And many of these issues that you're talking about have been many of the issues that the church has wrestled with. For example, the nonverbal mimicry and the Latin Mass. I mean, that's a huge deal right now, because there are that sort of the hot segment of the Roman Catholic Church in the United States are people who want to go back to the Latin Mass. And these are not people who audibly translate or directly interface with Latin as a native language or even a language that they have mastery over. In other words, it's something that is deeply anti-Protestant. And I don't mean that to trigger, the tribal warfare, which after 500 years has in many ways just sort of started settling down. But it's, I mean, the Protestant reformations were all about processing the faith in certain registers of human interaction and preferring those to others. And that quite, rightly launched, the political revolutions, the scientific revolutions. Although your comments earlier about, I liked your three principalities, because you're also right that this tussle between, let's say, government and religion. I mean, that those used to be pretty much one thing. And for most of human history, they were one thing. And when I comment to people that Pontius is a Roman imperial title, that basically the Roman Catholic Church is going to say, we'll take this. I mean, that's
Yeah.
pretty much what they did. And when you recognize, because in our little family of Discord servers that are sort of around the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, there is a Pontius Discord server, which, well, we are Bridges of Meaning Discord, and a Pontius is just the Latin word for bridge. And well, when you think about what the Roman Empire or the Pharaoh were, how they were Pontus, the emperor was Pontus because he was the bridge to the gods.
Right. Right. Yep.
And what happened during Constantine was, see, part of, if you look at like Tom Holland's work, if you look at Peter Brown's work, and I really have to read far more broadly on history in that period. But so Constantine was attempting to, the bridge had gotten way too broad and was unmanageable for paganism. Polytheism was simply too costly, because as Augustine mocks the pagans for, there's a god for the door, then there's a god for the lock on the door, then there's a god for the knob on the door, there's a god for the hinges on the door. And so but the door, the eidos of door, is one thing.
Yeah.
And so what's happening in late antiquity is they are trying to look, and again, these aren't conscious decisions. This is distributed cognition, okay?
Yes.
As you
Yes.
described it.
Good point.
And they are looking for, in a sense, one God to rule them all. Because maintaining the God for the hinges, and the God for the wood on the door, and the God for the knob on the door, and the God for the threshold of the door, and the God for the door frame. How many sacrifices can you make? How many priests can you employ? It is, now we're into economics, it is simply too uneconomical to maintain all those gods. And so what you need is a one God of heaven and earth, who in fact has conquered the principalities and powers. And so what you have is a succession of Roman emperors who are sort of trying out these gods. So you have a guy who arises, and this is his God that's going to rule them all, but he doesn't last. And another one, this is a God who will rule them all, he doesn't last. Constantine comes up with the Christian God, but with the Christian God comes along an entire network that is still a minority in the Roman Empire, who are already living and practicing this thing, but right away, one of the things Constantine wants to do is there's all these divisions within the Christians that we really want to clean up. So it was Christ God or was Christ not God? And so, all this stuff he wants. Well, why does Constantine want that cleaned up? Because he's a theological purist? No, because he needs his God thing to work. But the other thing that happens, and again, Tom Holland, I think, to me, has spoken clearer about this than others. The difficulty with that particular God that Constantine now conquers under is that is the same God who has gone and died the death of a slave and has arisen and now reigns on high as the Son of God. And so suddenly the Pontiff isn't the only Pontiff anymore, because even though Constantine wants this God to help him rule the world, now suddenly there's another force coming up from below, which is, well, the greatest among you, Jesus says, is the servant of all. And so, I don't think anybody has quite laid this out as clearly as Peugeot has recently, at least not in the YouTube space that we're all working in right now. This Christian God fills up the hierarchy. And it's in that way that this Christian God can actually manage to accomplish the trick that paganism needs it to accomplish. And then, the real suspicions we have is that process continued until you sort of get to the Protestant Reformation, where everything now has to become flat. And sermons are now explanations.
Mm. Mm.
Now before, you can't read the Bible and you can't read sermons even in the New Testament and not understand them to be at some level explanation. But I think, as you nicely noted, and I was a little confused at least at first when you talked about your enchantment, as you quite rightly note, as I'm speaking, even just the human voice is, and now with YouTube we can do more because I can move in close to the mic and I can drop the tone. And of course, preachers, this is what preachers do. We can empathize and we use pathos, but we also choose the words. And even though they're all coming through on the same stream and the impact we're registering is sort of one impact, oh, I was moved emotionally, you can actually pull that apart. And I can say things like, the New York Yankees rule the world. And and suddenly, yeah, you get the I know, I saw what you were wearing.
I was gonna change first too.
No,
'Cause
I'm
I was like,
glad you
oh,
didn't.
Jersey boy, and bad idea.
So, but, and this is, I've been thinking more directly about Peugeot's work, and I might make a video about that this week, because part of what's interesting about Peugeot, and of course, because of the Christian tribes, whenever I make comments about Peugeot's Protestant tells, tell is obvious a metaphor from card playing. Peugeot's Protestant tells, the Protestant nature of Jonathan Peugeot's work, people are like, no, he left Protestantism behind. He's an icon carver. He's doing more than most out there to promote the ministry of the Orthodox Church. But I say, yeah, but he's doing it by explaining, which is very Protestant. Because basically what the Protestants say is, we don't need any of the symbolism. We don't need any of this stuff over there. We're going to blank out the walls of the sanctuary. We're going to have just at most a bare, minimalism in terms of the cross. and we are going to, it's in that way rather, the simplicity is rather Buddhist, because we're going to strip everything away and we're just going to explain. And when you look at Protestantism, in some ways really hit its peak in modernity, because modernity is in some ways the peak Protestantism, and those things are deeply connected,
They
which is,
adopted the dualism. That
oh,
was
that's right.
they adopted it. So the Enlightenment comes along, the scientific worldview. John talks about this. I don't know if you remember the first Q&A you did on the Awakening from Meaning Crisis server. I asked you the specific question: What do you think about John and his two worlds mythology? Right? Because and you said something like, "Well, I think there's more wrapped up in it than he thinks," and I was like, "Yeah, that's a deep, correct answer from Pastor Paul there for sure, right? Like there's a lot wrapped up in there, but I think that line that science draws, because that's what science does. Science doesn't operate without strict, well-defined boundaries. That's the project of science.
Right.
It created the two worlds mythology. Two worlds mythology doesn't exist. The ancient Greeks didn't recognize this garbage. They were like, what? You could go to an ancient Greek guy and say, hey, how's that two worlds mythology working out? They'd be like, what are you talking about, dude? We don't do that. We're religious and philosophical. Like it's all the same thing. Like it's in the writings. People get confused. It doesn't exist. Like it's just a science. Science exists, but the church adopted it. It's like, no, don't adopt. Don't give that to them and then say, no, everything on this side of the tape is, like, we have all these sitcoms where, the roommates get into fights and then they try to drop a piece of tape down the middle of the apartment and then it never works out. And I'm like, well, that's a nice metaphor for what science and religion are doing. Like we're living in the same space. You can't just put a piece of tape down the middle and go, you stay on your side and I'll stay on my side. That's not going to work. What is wrong with people? But the church adopted the dualism. It acquiesced. It didn't, as a principality, say, no, first of all, science, you're with us. Okay. You're not going with government. You're not going with economics. You stay out of those fields the same way we do. Not that you don't overlap, but you're not in charge of that stuff. Like, just leave it alone. Instead, you're with us. We'll hang out together. We're buds. And, there's none of this dualism nonsense.
Well, and you remember back to the French Revolution, you've got three estates. You've got the king, you've got the church, and then, to listen to the rest of this history, then everyone else. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's key in terms of, because if today we were to say we are going to split the United States into three estates, we'll have government, church, and everything else, people would be like, if you tried to split America into three anythings,
right,
people would not imagine the division would be there.
But we have the fourth estate.
Oh, that's right. And they have the fourth estate.
And we got that from the UK, basically, which I learned recently. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I thought that was a US thing. No, it's a UK thing. And it's like, well, yeah, there's these, maybe that's where the powers come in. Although I just object to the word, but nobody knows what power is, right? You acquiesce to power.
The only reason I talk about principalities and powers is I'm just riffing off the Apostle Paul. And it's always a case that whoever gets there first with something has a huge advantage.
True, but our concept of power is wrong, right? Because as a wise man on YouTube has pointed out many times, you can't make me hate you. So how much power exactly do you have over me? Yeah. And people do this all the time. Well, the legal system, and I say, have you ever seen those little signs with the numbers along the highway? Do you think me and my BMW, which is designed to disobey those signs, actually pays any attention to that whatsoever? No, we do not. We do not collectively. Right. And occasionally I put the agency in my car when I don't want to be responsible for doing 100 miles an hour, getting onto a highway, which I can do, by the way. Very fun. I highly recommend, with the top down, wind over my bald head. It's beautiful. Right. The law is something that happens after you do a thing. It doesn't prevent you from doing a thing. Like, It's not how any of that works.
So, and yet we call these things laws of nature and laws of physics. And every time I point that out, someone on the channel is like, it's like, you don't get it.
Yeah, you're not getting the difference. Right.
Well,
Right.
C.S. Lewis keeps pointing that out, that when you call them a law of physics, what, you make everyone a citizen? You know, it's
Yeah.
there's a lot of deep stuff going on in the evolution of these things that we are, for the most part, oblivious to, because basically every 100 years, especially in America, we have this collective amnesia that sort of wipes through, unless there are institutions and communities of people that keep the thing going past the, the perpetual great genocide that is constantly happening around us. And we say, oh, that's normal. I'm against genocide. Oh, like the one that is always happening around us. But anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a good point. I mean, and that sort of segues me into something interesting. So I was talking to my crazy aunt last night, and before anybody gets too upset, I talked to my crazy aunt, and she said two things. You keep saying Paul, and I keep thinking you're talking about the Apostle Paul, and I'm like, that's because you're way too religious. I'm talking about Pastor Paul, so I have to call you Pastor Paul. And then I said, but yeah, I have to call you my crazy aunt. She's totally okay being called my crazy aunt. She knows she's my crazy aunt.
She's quite anti-fragile. You don't scare her.
She'll be
You're
fine.
her
Don't
little
worry,
nephew.
yeah, don't email me or write comments. It's all cool. And my family knows me well. Well, some of them do. The others are always surprised every time I do anything. But that's because they don't know I exist. But she was saying the Catholic Church has sort of learned that community is important, right? And they've been trying out this stuff, and now they have something other than CCD, which I barely know what that is. I have
CCD.
Yeah, the school, that the Sunday school, basically, right? They have more than that.
Oh, I don't know that language.
They're crazy. They're crazy Catholic school thingy. Right? They don't do Bible studies and stuff, although they've started to. And she said something very interesting to me. She said, so we get into this group and we're going over the 10 Commandments. And she says, we treated all the commandments pretty much the same. And she talked about the construct, and it was dead on. I'm like, yeah, this is right. This is right. And then she said, until we got to lie. And then everybody made an excuse for why you might have to lie. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, that's the problem that we have. Like, this is what Peterson talks about. Jordan Peterson talks about this. Don't lie. Why? Because you're destroying yourself, not because you're destroying others. You're destroying yourself. It's like, wow. And she was so horrified. It was her and one other person on the call that were like, no, because she grew up in a household, French Canadians, man, very Catholic, right? No, the only thing you have is your word. That's the most important thing. You're always honest. And they didn't feel that way about it. And I asked her up front, I said, who from the Catholic Church was there? And she said, no one. And I said, well, are they really building a community if they're not being the authority in the community? Because I think that's what church is for. Like, if they're going to be a religious community, they need to exert authority over that community. Otherwise, they don't have control of it. You've got Protestants running around everywhere, and they destroyed the world, Paul. So, although I could make a case, but I won't, because I like Pastor Paul too much, basically. No, but seriously, there is a sense in which if you let the people run wild without the religious authority and try to be their own religious authority in this group outside of the church context, you run a real risk that they're going to go off, and you've mentioned this before, start their own religion.
Well, the Protestant not only does the Spanish, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, nobody expects the Protestant Reformation. That's the same thing.
Yes,
because it will happen.
Yeah, the splintering is really So, if the Catholic churches are like, yes, we need more community, go off and do churchy community things, but they're not there for an authority to pull people back to the ideal. That's a real problem. I don't think that's going to work very well.
Well, they don't have, the Roman Catholics have had a real crisis of leadership. And this gets back to the monastery thing, which, I mean, once you understand some of these natural inflection points in the, we'll use a Pageauian, in the pattern of being, one of these things is one speed versus two speed. Two speed is, well, here's the monastery. The monastery is a incarnate ideal, which everyone, you put that up on high and it sort of pulls everything upwards with it. It's like reverse gravity. And it pulls everything, pulls it up with it. That's what the monastery does. Now, what happens, and again, as I don't know, I didn't read that whole chapter. Maybe I should, out of that book, Reformations, because what happens is by the time of the Protestant Reformation, the monasteries are one of the most corrupt aspects of the church. And everybody knows that. And the Catholics themselves admit that, because what happened over time was the monasteries were so powerful well, all of the monks took vows of poverty, but guess what? People still, same thing happened. I talked about Mother Teresa in my sermon on Sunday. This little book by fine author James Scott, available at Amazon.com. So Mother Teresa, this woman, Teresa of Calcutta, very interesting, really rather strange woman, decides, she's at a convent she's at a monastery in India, and there's huge poverty in the streets, and she gets this, basically this calling from God to go into the streets as a poor person and care for these poor people. So she does. And Catholics all around the world are like, well, and they don't know what to do. So they send money, because that's often what people, when they don't know what to do, money is easier than going themselves. So they send money. So suddenly, okay, because first she starts begging for her own food right next to the other beggars. And I'm sure the other beggars are like, you're here to help me. And, you know, I see this with the homeless people all the time. But anyway, and then people are like, it's not a secret that there were beggars on the streets of Calcutta, but now here's this nun who's begging. So they're going to give to the nun. And so then the nun's going to give down and help the beggars. But, before you know it, there's a whole new religious order that comes, and the whole thing cycles again, over again. And this is, if you look at the history of monasticism in the Catholic Church, and I dare bet you'd probably find it in other religions as well, you're going to find the same process again and again and again. It just keeps going around and around. The monastery, and the more otherworldly the monastics, the more energy you're going to develop. And you can see that in all of these monastic movements, where we're going to take a vow of chastity. We're going to take a vow of chastity and poverty. We're going to take chastity, poverty, and we're going to live on top of a pole. And, there's this race to the bottom, in a sense, to get, to demonstrate and we're not going to do it in order to demonstrate holiness. We're going to go into some place in the world where no one will hear about it, but then someone will find them, and the whole world will be a path to their door to look at the most hidden, most ascetic monastic around there. And then people will come and join them. And then they'll oh gosh, now we've got 4 people. Now we need rules. And the whole thing just starts going again. So in a sense, in the Protestant Reformation, the Protestants look at that, Luther was a monk. And it was so funny, because in one of Jonathan, no, it was actually in my conversation with Peugeot, or was it? I forget. But Peugeot at one point says, the Puritans, basically the Puritans beating themselves up. Puritans did that psychologically, not physically.
Yeah.
And that distinction is key, because Luther, before the Reformation, did it physically, and he stopped. And, just in that little inflection point, you can see a world of understanding of why this cycle happened the way it did. And so now we're sort of, there's an author out there who's making a point, something about basically 500-year cycles. And we're,
Mm.
and it's, you can't think about it scientific. It's like, oh, 500 years today. No, it's not the wrong kind of thinking. It's a lot rougher than that. But, you look at, you know, around, zero, around the time of Christ, then you look at about 1,000 where, Tom Holland basically writes, all these issues came to the fore at the millennium. 1500, you have globalization, you have the Protestant Reformation, you have that fallout, and here we are around the 2000, and we're doing it all over again. We're sussing out all of these internal tensions within the framework of reality. And so, but we're all tiny little, we're tiny, tiny, tiny.
Yeah.
And we're part of this whole process much more than we are shaping it. So I don't know,
Yeah. To some extent.
that was probably a huge distraction from, I don't know if I hit any new transitions on your list, or if we went all through your notes, or I don't know
No,
where
you
we
didn't.
are on the rundown here.
Didn't go through my notes. Are you kidding? Come on, Paul. This is me. No, no, it was good. I mean, Jung talks a lot about this, right? You get Jung and you
Oh,
see Jung.
Jung. He who
Right.
must
Well,
not be named.
I know, Carl Jung. He's the, but that's the whole thing. It's like, well, what exactly are you buying into, right? Because, well, I don't want to be ruled by this idea in this religion and this doctrine and this guy, God. Is he a guy? I don't even know, but I don't want to be ruled by that. But what's pissing me off, Paul? It's these powers and principalities that are forcing me to, like, some guy wrote a law in Congress, and now I'm like forced to do, like, oh, it's so unbearable. It's like, wait a minute. Are you sure you don't want to be? Because you're talking like you want to be ruled by the government or ruled by economic. Capitalism is so oppressive, man. It's such a bummer. It's keeping me down. Like, I don't have anything. Here we are, the top 1% global wealth, by the way, United States, bitching. Yeah. I don't know why the world doesn't like us. Oh, I'm so sick. 1% of global wealth, bitching. Yeah, and oh, it's capitalism is killing, and they're looking at us going like, I'll take some capitalism away from you. Why don't you know what? Give me all your capitalism. We'll take it, right? Like, give me your government. We'll take it. They're all hungry, right? Like, there are almost no countries that people don't leave to come here. Almost none. And people like, oh, the Scandinavian countries. Yeah. I worked for Nokia for a short time. They had a whole pipeline of people trying to get the hell out of Finland and get over to the US, man. It was a big fight. They were telling me about it. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, oh, no, no. And I'm like, really? They want to leave Finland? Like, they cannot wait. And it's not everybody, because there's a lot of lazy people over there who are like, this is great. I don't have to
Long
work.
winters and salted fish, but they got some good stories.
Well, and even the ones that are, yeah, there's a bunch of them who were in Massachusetts, right? They're in and they were not trying to climb out and become and get here permanently. They were trying to keep here, but they wanted all the benefits from Finland because they weren't go-getters. But the go-getters, the people with ideas who wanted to make things happen, all of them wanted to leave. All of them. They're like, no, we just need to be stationed and sponsored here. Right. And then they leave and get citizenship, and they quit Nokia and they go off and form their own company. There were a lot of people like that, because that was the terminus. Like, that's where they all met, was, in one of the US offices. And that happens. And so these people are acting like, well, I don't want the church telling me what to do. But I've got science telling me what to do. So that's cool. And I've got capitalism telling me what to do. And I've got, the
I've
government
got me telling me what to do, but they never sit and ask, well, where did me come from?
Right. Yeah, exactly. They never
Oh,
reference it back.
you just exploded on the universe from nothing at all. Your
Well,
creation ex nihilo was you.
no. See, that's unfair, Paul. I talk to these people all the time, and they're telling me we're one scientific breakthrough away. It doesn't matter what from, by the way. Like, people will do like, no. We're going to understand consciousness. We just need to do this one experiment. And I'm just looking at them like, are you on something? Do you know how long they've been saying they've got a handle on consciousness? They don't know anything about, like, not even John Vervaeke thinks we know all that much about consciousness. And I would say he's too optimistic. Like, they don't know anything about consciousness. They got no idea. Like, they're like, well, are you conscious when you're asleep? Are you conscious when they give you drugs to go into surgery? Like, they're so far away from even problem definition, right? John Vervaeke talks about this problem definition. They're so far away from problem definition that the idea that they're 1, 2, 3, 40 billion experiments away is laughable. They don't even know what they're talking about yet. They cannot scientifically define the edges of whatever it is they think consciousness is. And, I mean, that leads us back to, well, why isn't the church on this? So we're all focused on the best 20 to 30 years of our life all of a sudden. I don't know why. Is it lack of intergenerational families? That's probably part of it, right? Is it just the fact that we think we have solutions to this? Oh, when I get old, I'm gonna, move to Michigan and have Dr. Kevorkian or whatever, take care of this for me? Or am I gonna live a good life in retirement because I'll be able to do anything I want because I'm gonna have enough money, because money solves all problems. I'm going to be able to do anything I want, right? Like, I don't know, or look, I'll be fine. There'll be a nursing home for me and I'll be able to play pinochle all day and everything will be grand, right? And I mean, there's lots of factors. Like, science has solved this problem. They've got retirement, they've got pinochle, right, in the nursing home, and right, and they've got this whole thing, assisted suicide. There's 3 scientific solutions to that problem already. So I don't need to worry about old age, Paul. I'm all set. I'm good. So I think that's part of it. But the church isn't focusing on this. Like, if the church is a solution for how to raise your kids at all stages, right? How to manage your life at all stages, what to do at each stage of your life, and how to manage these other, principalities, these other 2, which are rubbing up against each other. And, I think that they should be sending out that message. I mean, look, Jordan Peterson sells meaning. He's like, hey, man, check this out. I got some of this, right? You want some of this? Is some meaning, baby. This is high quality meaning too. You want some? Come on back into the back alley. I'll give you some meaning, right? That's what he's doing, right? He's right. Well, why can't the church do that? Like, I'll note something. So I've been on Clubhouse quite a bit lately because a friend from Discord got me on Clubhouse.
I don't have an iPhone.
I have an iPad mini that.
Oh, you're right. You can get on with your iPad?
Generously sent to me for the purpose of being on Clubhouse. So I've been spending a lot of time on Clubhouse because I now have a toy. A, I have a toy. Ooh, I love toys, right? And B, like, this is a toy for the purpose of getting on Clubhouse. I'm on Clubhouse. I run into this guy, Greg Ellis, who has a YouTube channel. The Respondent is the name of the channel roughly. But I think it's Monkey Toes something Productions is the name of his production. And I fell in love with the guy. He's great. He's very talented. He's a voice actor and an actor, and he's very musical. And he'll come on and like reframe things musically. We had a lovely night Saturday night, or Friday night, actually. I laughed so hard I couldn't believe. I thought I was going to die. But he's got this YouTube channel, and I'm like, well, you know what? I'm going to listen to it because I really like Greg just for what he does on Clubhouse. And he keeps, he doesn't talk it up at all, right? He just mentions it. So I go and I watch the Heather Heying interview because, I was big into Dark Horse podcasts in the beginning. Like I said, Brett, the smarter brother, right? So I know quite a bit about Heather, relatively speaking, not that I know all that much, right? But I know something about her from watching the Dark Horse podcast when it first came out. I used to watch religiously every time they released something.
Heather, I think, is the smarter of the 3, for quite frankly. When I listen to all of them, I think Heather's the smart one. I really do.
That's possible.
I really do.
I'm going to reserve judgment.
The brothers like this culture of smart, but
yeah,
actually the really smart people understand that the culture of smart hurts them. And so what you really have to do is hide the smart and talk to people. Right. And Heather actually does that better than the other 2.
She's a well-grounded pragmatist. Yeah. So yes, from that perspective, she is the better of the 3. Yeah. And she does not use enchantment at all, you'll notice. So
no, she doesn't.
So she's going through her stories.
That's how you define enchantment, but go ahead.
Right. Yes. Thank you. Good explanation. Right. So she's going through her stories. Now, I've heard all these stories before, right? And so the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to learn more about Greg Ellis, right? Basically, right? I'm like, oh, well, what's Greg Ellis really like? Well, watch somebody that you know, and then you can do the compare and contrast trick, right? One of my many productivity tricks. Like you can do little things to find out a lot about people. So I'm watching, you know, and I'm still wrapped up in Heather's stories because how do you not cry when she talks about a relationship with her father and you know, all of these weird things that happened. And, you know, but the interesting thing is she's saying, I think there's something to religion, but I'm not there yet. And I'm like, after those miracle stories that you just told, really? Like, wow. This leap of faith thing's a big deal, Paul. I think I'm onto something with this. so,
You'll be a
so
Calvinist before you know it, my friend. God doesn't, you
I
don't
don't know
choose
about that.
God, God chooses you. I keep telling you that. People don't
I don't
believe me, but it's true.
I don't know. I don't know about that. But the interesting thing to me was Greg's asking these questions and, you know, everything goes back to meaning. Everything keeps going back to meaning. That seems like everybody's like around the same thing. It's all about meaning or lack of meaning or loss of meaning or whatever. And it's very clear. So the whole conversation on the internet, maybe due to Peterson, but maybe not just due to Peterson, right? Maybe it was always sitting there waiting to be broken open or something. I don't know. Is around meaning. Why can't the church do that? Why can't it have these conversations? Why is it? It seems to be pointing off towards God or the ineffable or whatever without ever defining it. It's got no practical implementation because it's lost the monasteries. And like there's nothing going on. I mean, they're closing the nunneries left and right, the convents, right? They're just everything's getting closed. You know, there's not enough people, whatever. Well, like you're not talking up the meaning. I mean, here's Peterson. Yeah, look at this. It's high quality. This is a high quality. We'll go in the alley. We'll transact, right? And it's like the churches are right there, and I don't hear what they're saying. Like as far as I can tell, they're not saying it now. The wonderful thing about living down south is I drive down the street. I get two ways I can go: towards civilization or away from civilization. I'm right on the edge, right? I'm right on the edge of Columbia. So I'm 20 miles from the state capital. Beautiful. It's such a awesome location. I got 12 acres of land, a pond, a stream. You know, I got all kinds of things going on here. It's beautiful. But if you go the wrong way and you don't have a full tank of gas, you could run into trouble very easily, right? I mean, there's only a few roads and some of them just, there's no gas stations or convenience stores or anything. But there are signs in people's yards, right? So in the middle of COVID in particular, love first. These people are just putting these signs up, right? And the churches are there. They're everywhere. Like you can't even avoid, you can't go down an empty road because there'll be a church there somewhere, right? And they've got clever signs, right? They've Jesus is with you and all this stuff. And then sometimes they get clever and secular about it. But I don't hear their larger message about what I'm supposed to do with my life, with this point of my life and that point of my life. I don't hear their message around meaning or whatever their equivalent is even. I don't hear any messages out of the church. I'm really not, I see the churches, right? I see their signs. Some of them are awesome. They're very clever. I might agree with most of the sentiment coming out of them. They'll put in a Bible quote thing that is meaningless to me because if I read the Bible, I certainly don't remember it chapter and verse like that. And that's no good, right? That's not landing. And they, you know, and they're not modernizing the message, not the language. They're modernizing the language. That I think is a mistake. You want to modernize the message. And they're not giving me any reason to go in. And then when I get there, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So I've been to church with my aunt a few times because we hang out on Sundays sometimes. And, you know, again, if somebody makes an offer for you to go to church with them, and unless it's like a midnight mass or something where I do actually say, no way, then you go because that's the polite thing. This is how you get along in New England. Otherwise you're dead, right? Because everyone's got a stupid different religion up there. And, you know, so you have to be mindful of these things. But I go and like, I don't know what the hell they're doing. Why are we kneeling here? Wait, what's going on? And, you know, everything's crazy with COVID. So there's no more wine. It's like, well, I mean, I only came to get drunk. Like, I don't drink. I don't actually drink, but you know, like what's going on? This is all, and it's all different because they're saying different things at different times. I've never heard you guys say that before. you're mumbling away and I'm just moving my mouth like, yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. I got a mask on. No one can tell. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm right there with you. I don't know what's going on, and it's different. And I'm like, I have no guidebook here. I don't, and we don't, the church was all spread out because of COVID. So there were no books underneath because normally you can grab the book and kind of play along. That was never good in the Catholic Church anyway. Like you'll get I need like you ever see that game Shoots and Ladders? I need the Shoots and Ladders Pictionary version of what's going to go on this Sunday, man. That's what I need. Like, okay, you're going to start out here and then it's going to say this and then you're going to do this. It's like, oh, okay, I got it. I mean, but at least they had the organ music, which was nice. So, they got the singing and the nice ethereal sounding music. I was in with all that. But like, where's the message? They mixed metaphor about vines and pruning and fruit. And I'm like, these things don't go together, guys. You got to do a better job.
No, vines and pruning and fruit do go together, and tree branches don't, but the vines and
Right.
pruning
Well,
and fruit do.
yeah, it was in relation to trees. And I was like, what?
Well,
Are
yeah,
you talking about trees or vines?
Vines. Well, let's back up a second here, Mark, because we not too long ago we're talking about apprenticeship where the mentor doesn't teach, where the mentor doesn't talk, and that I think is a really powerful point. Like many people before, I worked in a job where I basically think and talk, and my body just, atrophies into nothing, especially during COVID when everything is shut. But the world doesn't care about anything, neck down. It has a little bit of interest in how big I let this thing grow. But
Looking good, by the way. Looking good.
I almost got rid of it this week, and it's getting to the point. It's like, I'll just shave it off. That'll come. I got to do it before I see my mom in New England, because then she's going to be like, because when I walk into the house, she'll look at me and she'll just stand there a minute while anyway. So because your story is really instructive in this, because I think in a lot of ways for you, it's both too close and too far. And I see this because American church participation reaches its peak in the 1950s and 60s. And so a whole generation grows up just deeply familiar with what had sort of been, in many ways, the McDonaldization of church in America in the 50s and 60s. And the next religious move, and then you had the caving in of the main line, because, well, that's a whole nother long story, and sort of the correspondent rise of the evangelicals. So, it was sort of like Yellowstone National Park, where that lake is, because they're really sitting on this giant volcano, where one part of the park goes up and so another part goes down. I mean, the whole park is like this in Yellowstone. So the mainliners were cratering, and the Roman Catholics were cratering, and the evangelicals were rising, because the evangelicals were explaining and talking. And in many ways, the evangelicals are always trying to play catch up with the rest of culture. So if you like guitars, we're going to play guitars in church. And if you like smoke machines, we'll have smoke machines. And if you like coffee shops, we'll have coffee shops. I mean, so that's the whole evangelical seeker thing happened in the 80s and 90s as we respond to that. And then a whole nother generation came around and said, yeah, but if I want to go to church, I want to go to church. And that's like going to the movie theater, to my junior college, or to a rock concert. I mean, because the truth is that the music that you hear at church isn't as good as the music that the number one musicians in the country are playing.
Right.
They have fine-tuned the craft, and you're kind of like them, but it's sort of like, when the smartphones are popular and your grandma hears that the new iPhone, there's only one of them, is the smartest thing. And so then they give you this, this knockoff phone. It's like, I wish I had an iPhone. And,
Right.
On and on and on and on. And so then,
Right.
of course, after the seeker movement came the emergent movement, which sort of split up into all kinds of things. But one of the things was, well, now suddenly it's cool in church to have weekly communion and have a thing of water there. And the Roman Catholics are like, yeah, that's holy water. And the Protestants are like, remember your baptism. You can't call it holy water because still a little close to the big fight. So remember your baptism. And
Too soon.
they do all those things. So you're still a little too close. Now, I'm not saying that. I mean, I thought the description of Jordan Peterson visiting the Orthodox Church was absolutely hysterical because his wife kind of liked it, but he couldn't sit still. I
Yeah. Yeah.
totally believable.
This is my shocked face.
So, but what's happening in church all over is because when I listen to you talk about, you're wanting someone to explain, and that's exactly what Peugeot is doing. And it's something I appreciate with, so over the last 3 years, I've had to get up to speed on Roman Catholicism because basically I didn't pay much of any attention to it because why should I?
Yeah.
Because if I'm a pastor and I want to, you know, be competent in my field, there weren't really the people to study so much over the last 40 years. They're mostly sort of staying in business by bringing in priests from the Philippines and immigrants from Mexico because Americans were sort of Catholic like Joe Biden is Catholic, or
Yeah.
we have a Catholic president, by the way, but
Yeah.
that's very different from what's her last name? Amy Barrett. Anyway, the most recent Supreme Court justice. I mean, for a lot of people, she's the wrong kind of Catholic, and Joe Biden is the right kind of Catholic.
Right. Right.
And so, it's a good time right now to sort of be Catholic because their stock is gonna be rising along with the Orthodox. I mean, it's a really good time to be Orthodox, kind of a hard time to be Protestant, because right now the Protestants are all gonna have to do a whole bunch of working out their stuff for a while. But it's a pretty good time to be Catholic. It's a very good time to be Orthodox.
Yeah.
So, but it isn't gonna happen in terms of explaining
Well,
because
yeah, I don't think that's what I'm on about, Paul. I don't think it's really about explaining
you say Paul just
necessarily.
like my cousins say Paul. But go on, I liked it. They're all from New England, so when you said Paul,
There
it's
you
just like
go.
I just heard all my cousins address me when you said it that way.
Excellent. I'm glad I could bring a little joy to your day. Yeah, I think that it's not really about explaining so much as it's about being able to draw people into an idea. So
No, but I want to know in your case, because for
uh,
me, you've got, I want to know about you because you are the guinea pig in my little experiment. And but you talk unlike all the other guinea pigs. And so
yes,
I want to know, when you go to the Billy Graham shrine and when you go to the Roman Catholic Church with your crazy aunt, I want to know what goes on in your head because to
yeah,
me, you are also part of this grand, you know,
right,
pile of
right,
data that I'm mining. So
right.
that's what
Well,
I want to know.
look, I'm just happy that you admitted that I'm your guinea pig and that you're running this experiment because I've been telling you that you keep resisting my framing, and now I have your admission, so I can die happy. Good. So yeah, I think that that's the so I so what so
Because
and
it's really
Joey.
hard to see yourself because it is. So I'm looking at you and you're looking at me looking at you.
So Joey talked about this, right? Like what, if you can figure out what happened to you, Mark, when you went to the Billy Graham library, let me know. And I'm trying to explain it. And I just, I like the world is a different place. Like since I went there, it's still a different place. I went home to a place I've only been living in about 4 or 5 years, and it was not the same place, right? I was in my car, it was not the same car, right? I'm driving down the same roads because the Billy Graham Library is like 5 steps from the airport, from the Charlotte airport. It's the major airport. I go there all the time. I fly all over the place. I fly in and out of Charlotte. You pass the library. That's how you do it. Like, those roads are very familiar to me. I don't know. I haven't been on the roads I used to go on are gone, right? The house I used to live in is different, right? The car I was driving is almost the same. It does the same insane speeds and looks just as pretty, but it's not the same. And so, you know, you can couch this in Vervaekian terms and go, well, you know, when you put the signs up high and the contrast between the technology and the Cracker Barrel nature of the, right, Cracker Barrel meets church. That was brilliant phrasing, by the way. Thank you for that. I couldn't remember it at first. I was like, oh, what is this? So, but Cracker Barrel meets church, right? And then the signs are up high because when you look up how you think differently, yes, that's all in the research. It's in the NLP research too, by the way. It's not just John Vervaekian cog-sci sort of stuff. This has been known for a while, and they all couch it differently. But even then, right? So I come out of the, you know, this last phase, right? So what was the last phase? The last phase was a personal message from Billy Graham, which I do not remember a word of.
And that's key data right there. That's key data. Because he's Protestant and it's all about the words. So that's key. So thank you for that. Keep going.
Right. Don't remember a word of it, because when I leave that theater and these stupid doors open automatically, which just drives me nuts because I have no agency. No agent. I'm a pragmatist. I have all the agency, Paul, all of it. So door opens, dark, 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 unnaturally dark. And these crosses, the white outline light crosses. And you're walking through, I don't know, 4 or 5. I can barely remember. I don't know what happened. This is where I don't know what happened. And then all I see is this orange, right? There's a wall-sized painting, orange painting. You know, and then I get out, I stare at that for a while and I'm like, well, this doesn't have any of the qualities that I'm looking for, you know, because you'd think there'd be Jesus front and center, and I don't even think he was there.
That's exactly right. Compare that to going to the Catholic Church where you're at. Where's Jesus in that church?
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah. And he's right up here and he's over there and he's, yeah. And off on the left, there's a hill and there's an empty cross. And I was like, you know, and like, so now everything's broken. So I walk out of there. Right. And then there's these two people. Now, the whole time, right, there's evangelicals. I'm in enemy territory, Paul. Well, you're from New England. You know how we think about evangelicals, right? So the whole time I'm there, I'm expecting people when I walk in the door to take like Jesus on a stick and just right in my face. That's what they do. They've got little Jesus on a stick and they're just coming at.
And that's exactly wrong. Jesus is in the Catholic Church. Jesus is on the stick. He's never on the stick in the Protestant church, but where is he on the stick?
The New Englanders have a psychological projection problem. They don't know they have a Puritan ethos, even if they're Catholic. So they think that all the Puritan things that they do are things that people do down south, where they're the opposite. They're directly opposite. It's so strange. Anyway, they're asking me, would you like to pray? And I'm like, pray about what? I don't know how to. And I'm like, I don't know how to pray. I saw this Peugeot video where he was going over the story of Jonah. And I'm pretty sure Peugeot didn't, to the best of my knowledge, emphasize this, but I'm pretty sure part of that story was the proper role and way to pray. I'm pretty sure that was part of that story. Now, I don't know. I'm not Peugeot. I don't know. And I don't think he went into that, or maybe he did. And I just don't remember. But I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not getting involved in that, man. That's like, would you like to play with this nuclear material? I don't know, man. Maybe, but probably not. Like, I'm not going to, we'll leave that in the container. Thank you very much. And then they're like, why are you here? And I was like, look, I went there with a perfectly valid, I knew why I was there walking in. And then I see the crosses and the painting. I have no idea why I'm here anymore. I'm like, can't get to the car quick enough.
You didn't tell me you got there because a Calvinist pastor sent you?
No.
Told him that.
I would have had my brain been working, but like the brain was like I just wasn't.
But you don't have that when you go to the Catholic Church, because when you go to the Catholic Church, you sort of know what to expect because you've been there before.
No, I think the problem, but I didn't. So we went on Sunday and they're doing stuff that I don't think I've ever seen them do before. And I'm like, why are you doing this in this sequence? And I don't understand. And I don't have a pictographic representation of what the hell I'm supposed to be doing or what it needs. Right. So I don't want to step one, do that. Right. I want a shoots and ladders version. Right. I want the kids version that just has pictures. That's what I want. Like, oh, okay. Now I get it. Right. Because then I've got something to grab onto. Like, oh, I see, I see. All I can do is mimic these people and not understand what they're mumbling. That's no good.
But
But,
but now you have to understand that the people there that are running the show can't draw that shoots and ladders pictures for you, because that's not the way they have that knowledge. The way they have that knowledge and keep that knowledge is all in the ritual and the tradition, and sort of like these split brain experiments. You can ask them to explain it and they'll talk to you.
right.
But
right,
whether there's actually any connection between
right.
that, and then the crazy question is, well, then where exactly is that knowledge?
Yeah. Right.
Who has it?
Yes.
Who actually is running all of this? Because it's not it's not even the guy up front probably who's talking about branches and vines and trees.
Right.
Because he obviously, I don't want to speak ill of the guy via his, this, but he obviously, well, it didn't impress you at least, but I fail to impress far more people than I impress. I know that after 30 years of doing this, and especially after 3 years of doing it on YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I agree. I think part of the problem is the church, again, because they lost the monasteries and a bunch of other things, they've lost connection with their own message. Like they're pointing to God. Okay, what does that mean? Right? Now, I would argue that John Vervaeke does a much better job at pointing at the ineffable than the church does. Well, why the hell would that be true? Why would it be true that Jordan Peterson does a better job of talking about meaning in life and the fact that your life is a series of disasters, or what is life to Peterson? Something like a drawn out period of suffering punctuated by disasters or something, right? That's roughly where he's at. And
he's worse than the
enough.
Calvinists.
I don't think that's false, right? I don't think that's necessarily false. And the fact that you could have 20 or 30 years of your life where, according to science, you can control everything because that's what science buys you.
Well, and if you're extremely lucky to have been born in a country where there's all of this money and power and freedom and healthcare and food, and I mean,
the
that
top 1% of
yeah,
global
that's I mean, what you and I have had the privilege to live with is drop dead extraordinary compared to the rest of human history.
Right.
I mean, we should just acknowledge that. And Peterson does, and says, you'd think we'd be just a little bit grateful, but then again, this is who we are.
Right. No, he does go into that, right? And then, but he's able to say, look, maybe things are going well for you now, but maybe you run into a problem.
Like, maybe, as a pastor, I know, maybe it is coming. There is no avoiding it one way or another. Now you might be the coward and, find Dr. Kevorkian before anything ever sticks, but there's no meaning in that.
But it happened. See, and I think that's the wrong message, because no one's going to buy that because they've been living too easy for too long. So no one's buying that. Right. But, and then you run into these people all the time. It happens, especially in Europe. Well, nobody told me that if I took birth control for 15 years, that I couldn't just come off birth control and have a baby right away. Oh, really? Like nobody told you that, and you couldn't figure it out for yourself? Fair enough. But you're outsourcing your cognition to science, and science is not telling you the whole story.
To a scientific community. Let's be a little precise in our language. You're not outsourcing it to science, because science has no agency. You're outsourcing it to a particular community that not only is a scientific community, they're also a political community. They're also an economic community. They're also a religious community.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Science is trying to subsume everything. So they're trying to be everything to everyone, right? Because they want to reduce. They want to reduce everything to themselves, which sounds weird. Like, I wish somebody like 2000 years ago would written down in a book some principle like pride cometh before the fall. It would have been handy. Oh no, wait, they did. It's just nobody read it. Or maybe they read it and they didn't get the freaking message. I don't know. But so in my notes, I have our intelligibility versus our agency, right? Like, this is a message the church should be explaining to people. Look, free will and agency are A, confused by people like Sam Harris and confused by everybody else. B, very easy to solve. We don't have 100% free will in all directions. We have limitations. But within those limitations, we have a great deal of agency. We don't have perfect agency. I don't know why this isn't obvious. When you're a baby, did you have as much agency as you have now? No, of course not. So there's this curve of agency we go through, and some of us will go back to that baby state. Hopefully not. Hopefully we get to Dr. Kevorkian first, to your point. Yeah, but because we don't want to think about it, but it's going to happen, right? And we're not getting these messages. We're not getting these, like, things change, guys. Entropy is real, which is a scientific concept, but I'm all in. Like, evolution, yes. Entropy, yes. What does that mean? Oh, now this is where but what does that mean? Oh, there's implications to these things if we choose to engage with them, but we're not given a choice by the church. What's intelligibility? What is our agency? The church isn't explaining any of this to us in any fashion. Like, drop the scientific language if we want to go in that direction and adopt some other language. But they're not sending out that message. And again, it's not about explaining. I agree with you. It's not about explaining, but that message has to get out somehow. And they're not there, and they're not strong because they don't kick people out, at least not publicly, and they don't change the rules and kick people out who are innocent, because that's life, man. The church should just say, like, look, we're just changing this up, and I know we said we were going to do this, but we've changed our mind because that's how life works, and we're just going to throw you all out. And you've done nothing wrong, no hard feelings, see you later, bye. Like, they need to do that. Because
you don't know that churches kick people out?
No. They don't do it They don't kick the right people out, and they don't do. Look, I mean, I grew up in New England. We have a beef with the Catholic Church. They let those priests. And anybody in New England who tells you they weren't affected by that, or don't know somebody who was affected by that, is either the most oblivious person on the planet or is lying to themselves. Everybody I knew somebody who was directly affected by that scandal, knew somebody. And, the Catholic Church, if they want to take responsibility, which is fine, they hide cardinal law, no good, scumbag, no good, burn him at the stake, as far as I'm concerned, publicly, please, thank you very much, right? They take him to the Vatican, which is fine. Now you've taken on responsibility, and then they don't send him off cloistered somewhere, like publicly, which is what they needed to do. Well, look, then you should have given him over to the authorities and let them deal with him. Like, you've got a choice, fair enough, but you have to do the right thing.
So now you've been taking the church to task, and I'm not offended by that at all, because I usually do most of that. But I'll sort of slip into a role that I often don't take in public. Now, you're not down with Ritnar, religion that's not a religion. So which part of, the church needs to do this. And so because as a pastor, it's a very regular thing to have someone come up to me and say, well, pastor, what you need to do is, and I listen dutifully, and then I smile and I say, well, why don't you go ahead and do it? Because, and the benefit of being a pastor of an insignificant church, that, the real estate people are always they're just kind of sitting across the street in the car, like, when is Livingstone's going to go belly up so we can put up a Taco Bell? We're just 20 years they've been waiting for us to go belly up to put up a Taco Bell. And I'm not supported by Taco Bell in any way. Let me just make that statement clear. Yeah. Okay. So the church, and, Jordan Peterson, it's so funny listening to Jordan Peterson give church advice to Bishop Barron, on one hand, because I've been very plain right from the start that I was interested in Jordan Peterson because he, in many ways, was outperforming me, outperforming my church, outperforming the church within a little time spectrum. I'm going to add that little caveat because time is a real critical thing here, because the church has been in this game a very long time, which is actually a tremendously impressive thing, because the vast majority of things that start never last. And the church has actually managed to last, which is a very impressive thing. But so in some ways, when you're talking about, the religion that's not a religion, Ritnar, in some ways, beneath John's and all of John's generosity. I mean, the scariest thing about John Vervaeke is just how um generous he is. That's what should scare Christians more than anything else, because
Yeah.
you're not going to find a conversation partner who is more fair and generous and more lovely to talk to than John Vervaeke. I mean, I've got nothing but praise to say for him. But the project, which you immediately began this video saying, I'm not down for Ritnar. So which aspect of the religion that's not a religion are you not down for? You're basically saying, we need religion, and the religious vendors, I'll call them in a consumeristic American way, the religious vendors need to up their game if our civilization is going to actually get over this meaning crisis.
Right. Right. Well, and I would say that because John is forwarding Ritnar, the religion that is not a religion, that he also agrees that there's a right. He uses the term religio, right? Where what we're lacking is religio, and his short form definition for
But
religio.
there's a little bit of ironic to keep using Latin and Greek instead of English when we
I
want
know.
to sort of have a little self-transcend. It's an old pastor trick. It's an old church trick, of course. Hocus pocus and all of that.
It's enchantment. Yeah, that's jargon enchantment, right? And fair enough, because again, like I'm down with the jargon enchantment to some extent, because yeah, I want a new word, right? I don't like forms. I want eidos. I like John's eidos. I think that's great, right? Eidos good, right? Because we get too familiar with these things, and then they get broken from the concepts. So when he talks about religios, his short form definition is connectedness. And at first I was like, oh, that's sloppy. That's no good. Verveeke's got to up his game. And then I'm thinking about it more, and I'm like, oh man, that's probably the best short form
Yeah, I know.
definition for religio ever.
It's easy to critique, and it's like, okay, then you do better. It's like, oh, maybe I'll stick with that. I can't do better.
It's not even do better. It was just like, I don't know where he's going. I don't know about this, and usually for me, when I hear something and it's wrong, I know right away. I'm like, bang, that's definitely wrong. Or maybe I don't know how, but I know it's wrong. And that one was kind of like, I don't know. It didn't sound wrong, but it didn't sound right. And so that was just, and I know me. That usually means you don't understand something. So just be quiet, chill out, think about it for a couple of weeks. It'll get there, right?
Yeah.
So it did get there. But for me, having that aspect of slight renaming, right? He's doing a lot of vocabulary in the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series, right? He's outlining the science of meaning, in my opinion, right? That's important, but he is pointing at the same thing. At religiosity per se is important. Like, otherwise, why would you propose Ritnar? Doesn't make any sense at all, right? So obviously, to some extent, he agrees. And then the question is, well, yeah, and it's a fair critique, and I'm all for critique. I need as much critique as I can get, believe me. Otherwise, my ego will take you all over. It will eat all of you, Paul. It's waiting. It's got teeth. Yeah. So there are aspects of ritualism, right? Of ritual per se. There are aspects of the exploration of your limitations, right? So one of the things you get out of meditation in particular is, everybody calls it in the field monkey mind, right? You're like, oh, I quiet myself down, and this is the most difficult thing. People used to ask me all the time, like, how do you measure a man? You have him go in a small space and stare at a wall quietly for a while. See how long you can do it. Most people won't even try. That's how problematic they are psychologically. And they were asking me, how long can you do it? Yeah, about 4 hours, last I checked, but I get bored. because I got to do stuff. So I'm a pragmatist. I want to do stuff. 4 hours is way too long to be, I only want to sleep 4 hours, right? So, it's 4 hours is my limit for doing nothing. So you want things to do, right? You have to have things to cohere to, practices, rituals, whatever, right? John calls them practices. He's got you need a personal ecology of practices, and you're going to pick from some. We're going to schematize them because we're sciencey, right? And I've worked on some of that, right? So I'm not criticizing any of that. That's true. Like that, these are elements of the church that are real. Right. If I had a critique for the project of Ritnar, it's that those guys want to philosophize and they don't want to do anything, because the problem with doing something, believe it or not, is that when you do something and you claim like, I'm going to do X, and then you fail, you feel bad, as it turns out. And other people can your enemies can come after you, right? Or you can make new enemies that you didn't know you had, right? If we want to get all Petersonian about this framing, which obviously I do. I love Peterson. So, there's reasons why you don't want to do stuff and you'd rather philosophize about them. But when you sit in meditation, you see these monkeys and you're like, oh, wait a minute. There's like little things going on in my head that like I didn't even know were there. What's that about? Right. And the church isn't, the church frames this in dualism. Like Satan's out there and God's pushing against him. And it's like, oh my goodness, stop. That's not what's going on at all. First of all, there's not two things. That's the first problem. You've oversimplified. You're already scientific reductionist on this issue. And now you're making it dualism, which means you're taking this binary adaptation of the world, and computers are all binary. Weird coincidence that we're here now, right? And then that causes false dichotomy and false equivalency. And that's not the world isn't structured that way. So my lovely friend Kira, she lived in Santa Cruz, I think, and she moved to South Carolina. Partly my fault, by the way, which is weird. Like this is,
South Carolina's cheaper.
Yeah.
But if you leave California, move to South Carolina, you can get a nice place.
This is true. Although she had a nice place on the beach, but anyway.
Ooh, that's nice.
This is your fault, I'm sure, somehow. Anyway, so, but you're orchestrating everything. You already admitted I'm your guinea pig, so I know you're exactly. See, so she moved down here and she goes down to this Grace Life Church down the street, and she says this is a couple of weeks ago. She said, oh, the pastor had a lovely service. He started out with, I was going to start the service with a diagram, God up here, Satan down here, blah, 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 right? And layer 1, layer 2, right? And they're opposing, right? Very dualistic. And he says, then I realized that was wrong, because Satan doesn't do anything without God's permission. So it's God, Satan, Gabriel, right? It's like the archangels. It's the whole thing all of a sudden, right? Like right out of the middle of nowhere.
Is your mic okay?
No.
Yeah.
It's okay now.
Okay. I'm sorry.
These newfangled things you can't count on. So, they're very dualistic in their first run. Right? They're like, oh, we're just going to do this dualistically.
Peterson is enormously dualistic. I mean,
he is. That's a problem too.
I mean, right? Because when you listen to him enough, it's like there's good and evil, and it's like, okay, right. I'm not a skeptic of good and evil, but he as he sort of gets down to the bottom, it's like good and evil. It's like, Anyway,
right. Right. Well, and then or there's chaos and order.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Another dualism. Right. But what he's not telling you is that, and maybe he doesn't know, to be fair to Peterson, he's a pretty smart guy and, whatever, but, maybe he doesn't understand this. Like the order side is the side with no potential, and the chaos side is the side that's always open. But you can't be, and Vervaeke does go into this, right? You can't be open to everything, because then you fall into horror. Right. But if you're open to a positive possibility, then you go into awe. And that's the thing the church should be doing. The church, this is what I was saying earlier about Christians need to focus on what they have in common and not on what they don't have in common, or not on trying to convert or any of that stuff. They need to eyes down to the mission, right? They need to be sitting there going, we're doing this, and here's why we're doing this. Right. And the why can be living the life. It doesn't have to be an explanation, but it does have to be an answer to why. Why do I want to engage with the church? I don't know why I want to engage with the church. So far, I haven't found a reason to engage with the church. If their church is going to get all political, like Rick Joyner and Morningstar Church, which I'm promised to go to, I promised a friend that I would go. I haven't been up there yet, right? But I heard some
You
of his
see
stuff.
no reason why. Yeah, no, I get that. You're exactly right.
I heard some of his stuff. He's talking political. And I am so far out of the political realm. Now, mind you, I was 3 TV channels at once, 24/7 news. Like in my head, getting it all together and figuring it all out, making predictions left, right, and center. And my prediction rate was really, really high. People would come to me all the time, like, Mark, what's going to go on with this? And I'm like, it's going to happen this way, 87% chance, right? And I was pretty dead on. To be fair, I was pretty dead on. And then, at some point I was down the Tim Pool rabbit hole. Great guy. Love Tim Pool, support Tim Pool. Absolutely. I'm not listening to him anymore. I used to listen to everything he did all day. That was, did Ben Shapiro, right? Did Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad, love him. Support these guys. They're wonderful. Won't listen to any of them anymore. Why not? Because even if they're right, even if they know the truth, even if I assume there's an objective truth and they're right about it, not going to help because people aren't acting rationally. So objective truth claims don't work in an irrational world because objectivity needs rationality to produce a prediction. We're in chaos. That isn't happening anymore. What you need are personal sense-making tools. And the first step to that is know where your cognitive outsourcing is coming from. And that's part of what meditation gives you, is to understand you're cognitively outsourcing your definition of ethics. You're cognitively outsourcing your sense of morality. You're cognitively outsourcing what is right and wrong in your life. What are you doing it to? Scientism? Maybe, right? Are you doing it to...
You're doing it to a community.
Are you doing it to politics? Are you doing it to the news?
But those are too abstract because you're really doing it to a community. Because we look at these things, but there really are communities behind them because that's what's moving them. Science, these things don't move. It's the communities that move.
Well, it depends on your definition of community, right? So this is one deep problem. Like, I'm part Irish. Am I part of the Irish community? Maybe.
Well,
right?
I don't mean community in that sense. I mean, there's basically a Voltron out there that it's groups of people that have come together and are doing this collective cognition together in a way, because I mean, these things just nest. They're fractals, but they're nested fractals, and they just keep scaling. And so, you have voices within that are, it's unbelievably complex. I mean, we don't have enough time. I mean, with the limited tool that consciousness is, which really can only see and focus one thing at a time, we don't have enough time to actually see that. Even in a family, I mean, family, especially families today are, 4, 5, 6 people. I mean, they're tiny. Even in a family, there's more than we can see going on. And even today, right now, families are, all over. They don't even vote together. They don't even worship together. And so that to me gets back to Peugeot's, what he keeps pointing to Peterson is attention. And of course, Peugeot is saying attention as a nice secular word instead of the word he really wants to use, which is worship.
Right.
So Mark, we're at 2 hours and we should land the plane here. But I know we could, one of these days, I got to get down to visit the Billy Graham shrine with you. And maybe one of these days, if we, I am thinking that post COVID, I got this little building here and the church does. And I think, well, if I can run a conference and make a few shekels for Living Stones, but we could kind of put on some cool conferences. So one of these days, you and I are going to have more time to talk, and you would fit in really well with the meetup, the Sacramento meetup people, because we could talk for hours, but
Yeah, no, I'd love to get up there sometime. If I had the financial resources, I would
you drive
definitely.
that Beamer right across the country. Whoosh,
I
cannonball
guess
run.
I'm gonna be. I'm not gonna drive it that far, but I'm gonna be driving it up to New England at the end of the month. So gonna be on Cape Cod. So
Ah, nice.
yeah, I have a timeshare up there, so I'll be looking over the vineyard, right, doing my thing. I'll take the car with me so I don't have to rent one when I get there.
So if people after these 2 hours haven't gotten enough of Mark can be found at the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord server.
That's correct. I'm also on Clubhouse
Oh,
far
you're
too
on
often.
Clubhouse.
Yeah, easy to find. I talk about Vervaeke in my bio, of course. Love John. John's excellent. He's enabled a bunch of this stuff. And I'm going to do my YouTube channel. So I'm that's
What's the YouTube channel going to be about? All this
it's
stuff?
it's going to be about sense making. At least in the beginning, I'm going to talk about sense making. So I know, Paul, I sent you something on the whiteboard a while back, and it's this 3-slide thing, and all you responded with was yes in all capital letters and 3 exclamation points, as I recall.
Oh, that's pretty good endorsement.
I turned that into a slideshow presentation.
Oh,
So that is where we are, why we're stuck in politics, how to, what we're doing to get out of it, basically, and where we need to be at the end. So it's roughly it's going to be 4 or 5 slides. I've got most of the vocabulary around it. I've done a couple test runs. I'm hoping to have a video up soon. I'll get you a link to the YouTube channel. I got to turn it on. It's all prepared. I've been busy and wacky things are going on, and my health hasn't been the best. I keep getting tired in the afternoon, and then I'm like,
your health hasn't been the
I can't
best.
work.
You're not old. What's going on?
I got it. Immune deficiency problem. Who knows what it is?
What's with all these immune deficiency issues? I mean, is it the chemicals or is it?
Who
There's so
knows?
many of them all over the place now. It seems.
Yeah. No. It's what it is. It's lack of church.
There you go.
It's
There you
yeah. Who
go.
knows? Who knows? Yeah, I've been doing. Yeah. If anybody needs to know anything about stomach problems or immune system deficiency, just ask me. I probably know about the latest.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Mark. That's
Yeah, no, it sucks. I was going really well, and then last week I just fell apart, and then I had to scramble to clean the house and get everything ready for my aunt, and
oh.
so yeah, I've been trying to get videos out, and I've got to set up equipment and lights and microphones
and microphone stands, because it looks to me like you're holding that thing.
Yes, I am. Yeah. It popped right off the desk. I was like, what? How did that happen? So now I got to figure out what I think I know what to do. I think I've got a plan to fix it. But yeah, right. There's always a problem. I went through 3 of these things before I got one that worked. And there's always a problem, Paul. It's almost as if life is suffering, punctuated by catastrophic events or something. I don't know.
Rosanna, Dana. There's always something. There's always.
So I'm gonna get that up and running. I've got a website. So
wow, you're going big. You're joining the game.
It's terrible, right? We're still firing up. I'm working on meaningcommunity.com. So I'll get you links for all this stuff, right? And then I did. It's not finished, but it's 90% finished. The paper on reducing sleep. So it's here. It'll be done by the time this video's out. I'm just got it in editing mode. Everybody will be able to figure that out, harkening back to our first conversation. And yeah, I mean, I'm going to be on the Discord server as often as I can. I'm going to be engaged in Clubhouse, right? I'm happy to talk to you anytime, obviously, right? About any topic that we can manage to agree on, even though you're from New Jersey and you brought up the Yankees, and I don't know if I can for that. But we'll find a way through it.
Okay. Well, Mark, it's a pleasure. And you're gonna have to get me those links soon, because I don't think I'll post this tomorrow, but maybe Wednesday. That's kind of
no. I'll get you the links probably by tomorrow morning.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Well, I'm excited you're gonna start a YouTube channel. I'm kind of, and then instead of having to find some obscure video, you say you have to watch this, then I can just go right to your channel and it'll be right there. Are you going to do, what kind of stuff are you going to do? And you're going to do slides, you're going to do conversations like this on your channel too? What are you going to do?
I don't have any plans for conversations yet, but I imagine people will want to have conversations. I've had a few, right? I talked to Shane, right? I talked to T for Tech, um, right? I'm going to have a conversation with somebody on our Discord server, Justin, who's very nice. So, I do conversations as requested, right? I did one on the meaning code. We've talked to Mary Cohen twice, Manuel and I.
Yep.
Manuel and I talked to Jules, right? That's
Yep.
on the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord YouTube channel, right? So,
Yep.
I don't plan so much that. I'm going to focus for now on sense making.
Okay.
And I'm probably going to have a list of videos and why I think they're important, right? I'm probably going to put that up on my website too once I get the website's really ugly, but I'm going to put it up anyway, and then we'll improve it over time if we can manage such a thing. And I'm working on the meaningcommunity.com site as well, right? We're just trying to get right. We're getting ready. We're ramping up. Vervaeke's going to talk to Peterson at some point. That's going to be an interesting.
That's going to be an interesting. I'm really looking forward to that conversation.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I laughed. I almost fell off my chair when we were in the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord question and answer. And Strawn basically said, and for your conversation with Peterson, I thought, oh, John was like, there's been a few people that have had offered ideas for my conversation with Jordan.
I bet. Yeah. There's so many ways they could go, and and you don't know the history, right?
Oh, exactly. I mean, there were colleagues, and I really wish, because I know he told me, so they had two significant public conversations. The first one was not recorded. It's like,
right.
that
Oh, too
really,
bad.
he said, and that was the better of the two, because I've watched the second one, a lot. I've watched that second one quite a few times to just try to understand where they're coming from. So I'm really looking forward to his conversation with Jordan, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. So anyway.
Yeah, it'll be great. So yeah, another topic comes up, Paul, where you can find out where your guinea pig is lost next. You let me know, and
Guinea
we'll
pigs don't get
do it again.
lost. We left them in the backyard one night, and the kids were like, we left the guinea pigs out last night. We went right in the backyard, and there they were. That's the way they survive. Find something to hide under.
Down.
All right, Mark. It was great talking to you.
Thank you, Paul. Have a lovely day.
We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.